Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine for a moment. A young boy stands alone at the edge of a silent forest. The mist hangs low, and the trees sway gently, as if guarding untold secrets. In his trembling hands lies a tiny sparrow, its wing broken, yet it sings, a fragile melody like a cry for help. The boy does not shiver from cold, but from a deeper kind of emptiness. One that has taken his voice and perhaps his will to hope. Who is this boy? And why would a wounded bird be the first to hear the sorrow he's never spoken? But before we begin the story, don't forget to support this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and keeps us excited to bring you more heartfelt stories. And don't forget to check in through the comments. Let us know where you're listening from, so we can see just how far our stories have traveled. Now let's return to the story. The morning sky was gray. The wind moved gently, afraid to disturb the sorrow that lingered in the air. On the edge of a quiet village, an 11-year-old boy walked alone, collecting small branches for firewood. His eyes, once bright, now held a silence deeper than words. His name was Rocca. 2 years ago, a landslide had taken his parents without warning. Since that day, Rocca had rarely spoken. Not because he couldn't, but because he believed no one wanted to listen. He now lived with his aunt, Miss Surti, a cold and bitter woman who often reminded him that he was unwanted. Every morning before school, Rocca had to sweep the yard, wash dishes, and sometimes even cook rice by himself. If he was late, the sting of a harsh slap was the first thing he felt. School things were no better. While other children laughed and played, Rocca sat beneath the old mango tree, silently drawing with a worn pencil in his father's notebook. Sometimes he drew the mountain, sometimes his parents, but most often he drew himself alone. One chilly morning, while gathering firewood near the forest, Rocca heard a sound. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a wild animal. It was a song, soft, broken, and beautiful. He followed it and found a small brown sparrow, lying on the ground, its wing hanging uselessly by its side. The bird looked up at Rocca with wide eyes and sang again, the notes shaky, as if trying to speak. Rocca knelt beside it. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. The bird didn't answer, but it didn't stop singing either. Something about that moment pulled at him. He gently wrapped the sparrow in the corner of his shirt and took it home, hiding it beneath the torn blanket in his room. He named the bird Sicko. That night, Rocca sat beside Sicko, warming it with his hands. For the first time in a long while he spoke to someone, not a person but a creature he felt could understand. "My father once told me to be strong," he said softly. "But I don't know how to be strong when everything inside me feels broken." Sicko chirped weakly. Rocca smiled just a little. He felt heard. From that day on, something inside Rocca began to shift. Each morning, Sicko would tap at the window with her beak. When Rocca pulled the curtain, she would hop across his desk, sometimes dancing, sometimes pecking at his sketches like she was pointing something out. One morning, Sicko tapped at a drawing of Rocca standing on top of a mountain, shouting into the sky. "You think I can really be like that?" he asked. Sicko chirped and jumped onto his shoulder, gently nudging her head against his cheek. Rocca laughed quietly. It was the first time he had laughed in 2 years. But the world around him hadn't changed. At school, teachers still scolded him for being silent. The other children still whispered behind his back. And Miss Surti continued to remind him, "If you can't be a normal child, then you shouldn't be in this house." Rocca never fought back. But that night, he cried into Sicko's feathers. A week later, the village held its harvest festival, where children were invited to join a storytelling contest. The prize was a full set of school supplies and a certificate from the village chief. Rocka had no intention of joining. He only stood at the back of the crowd, watching quietly. Then something unexpected happened. A boy on stage forgot his lines and began to cry. People in the crowd chuckled. Some looked away. Some laughed openly. Rocka froze. In that boy's face he saw his own, small, afraid, unseen. Without thinking, Rocka stepped forward. "I want to try," he said. Gasps filled the air. The village chief raised an eyebrow. From the back, Ms. Surtee shouted, "Rocka, don't embarrass us." But Sicko flew overhead, circling the stage once before landing in a nearby tree. She chirped loudly, as if cheering him on. Rocka's heart pounded. His hands shook, but he stood firm. For the first time in his life, he spoke in front of a crowd. He didn't tell a fairy tale. He told his story. About the landslide. About the silence. About the bird who listened when no one else did. First no one understood. Then everyone fell silent. And then they cried. Rocka didn't see their tears. He only saw Sicko, flying in one wide circle above him before disappearing into the sky. That night, for the first time in his life, the world listened. The air in the village square was still. For a long moment after Rocka stepped down from the stage, no one spoke. Even the birds in the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then, slowly, like the first drop of rain before a storm, applause began. It started with the village chief, then the teachers, then the parents, and then the children. Some clapped quietly. Some wiped their eyes. A few whispered Rocka's name in disbelief. They had never seen him speak. They had never imagined that voice, trembling, honest and full of pain, could come from someone so quiet. But Rocka did not wait for their approval. He simply walked off the stage, head lowered, chest rising and falling too fast, like he still wasn't sure what had just happened. Sicko was gone. Not a feather in sight. She had disappeared the moment the last word left his lips. Rocka walked home that evening with shaky legs. His steps dragged in the dirt path. His hands were cold. There was no music in the trees, no voice in his ear. Just silence. But it felt different now. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness. It was the gentle kind. The kind that listens. The kind that waits. When he reached the front door of his house, Miss Surtee was already standing there. Her arms were crossed, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. For a long second, she stared at Rocka without speaking. Then, in a voice lower than usual, she said, "So you made them cry, huh?" Rocka blinked. He didn't know if it was praise or scolding. Miss Surtee turned around, muttering, "Don't expect a reward. Just wash your feet before you come in." That was all. No slap. No insult. No threat. Felt strange. That night, as Rocka lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling with a blanket pulled up to his chin, he kept thinking about Sicko. He wondered where she had gone. He wondered if she would come back. But most of all, he wondered why she left just as the world had started to hear him. His eyes grew heavy. And then, just before sleep pulled him under, he heard it. A single chirp outside the window. Quick. Familiar. The next morning, Rocka woke up earlier than usual. The first thing he did was run to the window and look outside. The branch where Sicko used to sit was empty. But something caught his eye. Feather. Teeny. Brown. Left on the windowsill. He picked it up gently. Held it close. Still smelled like the forest. Like hope. School that day felt different. When Rocka walked through the school gate, several students turned their heads. Some waved awkwardly. Others whispered to their friends. Rocka felt a tingle in his chest. Not fear. Not shame. Something new. He sat under the mango tree as always. But this time a boy named Dito approached him. "Hey," Dito said, scratching his head. "That story yesterday, was that true?" Rocka nodded slowly. Dito sat beside him. "That was really something." They sat in silence for a while. Then Dito asked, "Do you want to draw together after school?" Rocka didn't answer at first, but a quiet smile formed on his face. He nodded again, and just like that something shifted. In the days that followed, Rocka began to speak more. Not much, just enough. Enough to answer questions. Enough to ask for help. Enough to say, "Thank you." Teachers noticed. So did the children. Even Ms. Surtee began to leave him alone a little more. Once, she even left a plate of warm rice and fried tempeh on the table without a word. He didn't ask if it was for him. He just ate it quietly, heart full. But peace is never safe for long. One afternoon, while walking back from school, Rocka heard a sharp cry from behind the rice fields. A group of children had gathered in a circle, shouting and laughing. Curious and slightly worried. He stepped closer. In the middle of the circle, he saw a boy crouched low, covering his head with his arms. His bag had been thrown into the muddy water. His clothes were soaked. And standing above him was Rama, a 6th grade student known for his cruel games. Rocka had always avoided Rama. He was bigger, louder, and never missed a chance to humiliate someone weaker. "Cry louder, you chicken," Rama shouted, kicking the boy's shoe into the mud. The boy whimpered but didn't say a word. Rocka's fists clenched. His heart pounded. He looked at the other children. No one moved. No one stopped it. Then he looked at the boy in the mud. And again he saw something familiar in those eyes. That same fear. That same silence. Rocka stepped forward. "Stop," he said, voice low but firm. Rama turned around slowly. "What did you say?" "I said stop." The crowd went quiet. Rama smirked. "Look who found his voice. You think you're a hero now? Just because you cried on stage like a baby." Rocka stepped closer. "I'm not a hero, but I know what it feels like to be him. And I know what it feels like when no one helps." Rama laughed, but something in Rocka's eyes made him pause. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. "You wanna get kicked into the mud too?" Rama sneered. "If that's what it takes," Rocka replied. Rama stared at him. The silence grew heavier. The other children looked from one face to the other, unsure of what would happen next. Then, without a word, Rama pushed past Rocka and walked away. The boy on the ground slowly stood up. Rocka helped him gather his things. His hands were shaking, but his heart felt steady. After that day, more children began to speak to Rocka. Some asked him to draw with them. Others asked him to read their stories. And one by one they began to see him, not as the silent orphan boy, but as someone brave enough to stand. But even as Rocka's world opened wider, he never forgot Sicko. Every morning, he left a few crumbs on the windowsill. He still kept her feather in his pocket. He still looked at the sky when he spoke softly under his breath, hoping she could still hear him. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the hills, Rocka sat under the mango tree, sketching the outline of a mountain. Dito sat beside him, holding another pencil. "What are you drawing today?" Dito asked. "A mountain," Rocka said. "With wings." Dito blinked. "Wings." Rocka nodded. "She flew away. But she taught me how to climb." He didn't need to say more. But deep down he felt it, something was coming. Something bigger than the contest. Bigger than bullies. A new storm. A new test. And this time, he would be ready. Days passed. The dry season faded slowly into gray clouds and chilly winds. The rice fields surrounding the village turned golden, and the farmers began to harvest what they had worked on for months. Everyone in the village became busy. Men repaired carts and sharpened sickles. Women tied bundles of rice stalks together. Children were told to stay home when the sky began to darken. But Raka couldn't stop going to the edge of the forest. Every afternoon after school, he returned to the place where he first met Sicko. Sometimes he sat quietly on the moss-covered stone, waiting. Sometimes he drew trees, feathers, or the way the clouds gathered before it rained. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the branches, he imagined he could still hear her singing. He missed her. Though things had become better, though he had friends now, though Miss Surtee no longer raised her hand against him, something in Raka still felt incomplete. Sicko had not returned. Not even a feather. Just a quiet that followed him like a shadow. One late afternoon, while the sun glowed orange behind thickening clouds, Raka heard a rustle behind the bushes. His heart leapt. He turned quickly, but it wasn't Sicko. It was an old man, hunched and weathered, with skin like dry leaves and a long scarf around his neck. He carried a bundle of sticks on his back, and his eyes were sharp, like someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. "You're Raka, aren't you?" the man said. Raka stood up slowly. "Yes." The old man studied him. "I saw you on the stage during the festival. You told the truth when others only told stories." Raka stayed quiet. The man dropped his bundle beside the stone and sat down with a groan. "You remind me of someone I once knew. A child who heard the wind before it spoke. Who understood animals better than people." Raka looked at him, unsure what to say. "Did you know," the old man continued, "that sometimes birds choose their humans? Not the other way around." Raka blinked. "What do you mean?" The man pointed at Raka's shirt pocket. "You still carry the feather." Raka instinctively reached for the tiny brown feather he always kept with him. It was worn and soft now, but still held the warmth of something he couldn't name. "She chose you, boy," the man said. "And that means something." Then the old man stood up, as suddenly as he had appeared. He picked up his bundle, nodded once, and disappeared into the trees. Raka watched the leaves settle. His heart was pounding. Something about the man's words stayed with him long after the wind had calmed. That night Raka couldn't sleep. Thunder growled far in the distance, and raindrops began tapping softly on the roof. The wind pushed against the wooden windows like a voice trying to get in. He sat up and stared at the window. Then he heard it. Chirp. Soft but clear. He ran to the window and opened it wide. The wind blew in hard, bringing a rush of cold air and the smell of wet soil. But there was no bird. Only the night and the rain. He leaned out calling, "Sicko!" No answer. But something told him she was close. The next day the storm rolled in. Not just rain. It came with lightning that tore the sky open and winds that made bamboo fences rattle. The villagers stayed inside. School was cancelled. The fields were flooded by noon. Raka watched the rain from the wooden porch, wrapped in his thin blanket. Miss Surtee paced behind him, worried about the leaking roof. She didn't say much, just sighed and muttered about the weather. Suddenly someone knocked at the door. Hard. Yes. Miss Surtee opened it and was surprised to find Dito standing there, soaking wet, panting hard. "Raka," he called out, voice shaking. "You have to come. It's the tree. The mango tree. It's falling." Raka's heart dropped. He didn't ask questions. He ran. The wind slammed into him as he stepped outside, the rain cutting across his face like tiny needles. Mud splashed beneath his feet as he followed Dito through the narrow paths, past flooded rice fields, past the broken fence near the well, until they reached the schoolyard. The old mango tree, the tree Rocca had sat under for years, the one that had given him shade when the world turned its back, was leaning dangerously. Its roots had loosened from the soaked soil. One of its large branches had already snapped and lay crushed beside the pavement. Children were watching from under shelter, whispering. Some had tears in their eyes. One said, "The birds that lived there are all gone." Rocca stepped forward. He ignored the rain. He ignored the voices. He walked up to the tree and placed his hand on the wet bark. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned and ran back to the forest edge. He needed to see the stone. He needed to know if she was still there. She was still watching. If he had been left behind once more. When he reached the clearing, the rain had slowed. The sky was still dark, but the wind had calmed, and the forest floor was covered in fallen leaves. The stone was there. Rocca fell to his knees. He didn't cry. He just sat, letting the rain drip from his hair and fingers, letting the cold settle in his bones. "Why did you leave me again?" he whispered. "Why do you always leave when I need you the most?" There was no answer. Then suddenly a soft sound broke the silence. Chirp. One. Then another. Rocca looked up. Perched on a low branch above him was Sicko. Wet, shivering, but alive. She fluttered down, landing on the stone gently. Her wing, once broken, moved perfectly now. She looked straight at Rocca, chirped twice, then walked to the edge of the stone, tapping her beak against the surface. Rocca followed her eyes. There was something scratched into the mossy stone. Something he hadn't noticed before. Shape. A small bird. And beside it a boy. He blinked. How long had that been there? Sicko chirped once more, then flew. Not far. Just to the next branch. Then again, farther into the trees. She turned her head as if calling him. Rocca stood. And followed. Not knowing where she would lead. Not knowing what was waiting. But knowing that some journeys begin when you finally decide to chase the voice that calls you forward. The rain turned into a soft drizzle as Rocca stepped deeper into the forest, following the flashes of brown and white as Sicko flew from branch to branch ahead of him. The ground beneath his feet was damp, but his steps grew faster. His chest burned not from exhaustion, but from something older. Something that had lived inside him since the day his parents disappeared beneath the earth. It was a feeling he didn't yet understand, but that now pushed him forward, chasing a bird that had once pulled him out of silence. The forest was no longer the quiet, still place he remembered. Tonight, it pulsed with breath and shadow. The trees whispered in voices too old to understand. The leaves on the ground seemed to shift just after he stepped on them. Somewhere to the left, a wild dog barked in the distance, then went silent. Still Rocca followed. Sicko's small body moved like a ghost between the trees. She never flew too fast. She never went too far. She stayed within sight, always stopping to make sure he was still behind her. And every time Rocca hesitated, she chirped once, clearly, like a bell ringing in the dark. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. He no longer knew how deep they were in the forest. Then Sicko stopped. She perched on a gnarled old branch hanging over a wide, mossy clearing. Below her was something Rocca had never seen before. A circle of stones, half buried under dirt and vines, but still standing tall. In the middle of the circle was a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting the gray sky above. Rocca stepped into the clearing. The silence here was different. Not dead, but ancient. Sicko flew down and landed at the edge of the pool. She dipped her beak into the water, then looked up at him, unmoving. Raka approached slowly. His heart thudded in his ears. He looked into the water, and what he saw made him freeze. Not his face, not the trees behind him, but memories, flickering across the surface like ripples of light. He saw his mother's arms holding him tight. He saw his father laughing as they climbed the hill behind their house. He saw the landslide, the way the earth swallowed everything, the way he screamed and no one answered. Then the silence, the years without voices, the drawings, the loneliness, and finally, echo. Raka dropped to his knees, breath caught in his throat. "What is this place?" he whispered. Sicko chirped again and pecked gently at the moss-covered edge of the pool. Raka followed her gaze and saw something carved there, so faint he nearly missed it. To find the strength to speak, one must first hear their own truth. His fingers trembled as he traced the letters. He didn't know who had carved them. He only knew that they were meant for him. Behind him the forest rustled. The wind picked up. Branches bent and groaned like they were bowing. Sicko lifted her wings slightly but did not fly. Then from the trees a voice called out, "You weren't supposed to come here." Raka turned sharply. The old man from before stepped into the clearing. His scarf fluttered behind him like a tail of faded fabric. His eyes glowed with something strange. Sadness, maybe. Or recognition. "You're the boy with the voice," the man said, walking closer. "The voice that was buried. The voice that woke the stone." Raka stood, unsure whether to run or speak. "Don't be afraid," the man added. "This place doesn't hurt those who are honest." Raka clenched his fists. "What is this place?" The man looked around slowly. "It's where the broken voices come to find themselves. It's where the birds bring those who still have something left inside." He gestured toward the pool. "Did you see it?" Raka nodded. "And what did it show you?" "My past," Raka said. "My family." The silence. The old man stepped beside him. "Then it gave you the truth. And now you must decide what to do with it." Sicko flew back up to the stone circle and sat silently, watching. The wind grew stronger. The sky above darkened, and a single crack of thunder rolled through the trees. "What happens now?" Raka asked. The man didn't answer right away. He bent down, touched the water's edge and said, "You found your voice, Raka. But keeping it alive is harder than finding it." He stood and looked him in the eyes. "Because the world will try to take it back." Before Raka could reply, a loud noise shattered the air, a crash not far from the clearing. Trees groaned and something huge moved in the forest, heavy and fast. Sicko shrieked and flew higher. "What was that?" Raka gasped. The old man's expression turned grim. "Trouble. Come." They ran. Out of the clearing, back into the tangled woods. Branches clawed at Raka's arms and legs. Thorns tore at his clothes. But he followed the man, whose steps were quick and sure despite his age. Behind them, the crashing continued. Something big, something alive, was tearing through the forest with a fury Raka had never heard before. Then they reached the ridge. Below them lay the village, its lights flickering, some roofs already damaged. And at the edge near the school stood the mango tree, now completely torn down. But what truly stopped Raka's breath was what stood beside it. A wild buffalo, massive and crazed, its horns glinting in the fading light. Its eyes were wild, and on its back was a boy, Rama, laughing, yelling, holding a long stick like a whip. Children screamed and scattered. Adults shouted warnings, trying to herd them to safety. "He's lost control," the old man said beside him. "No," Rocca said, voice sharp. "He never had it." They watched as Rama rode the buffalo in wild circles, letting it smash wooden carts, fences, and anything in its way. "Why would he do that?" Rocca asked. "Because some children are filled with anger instead of sorrow," the old man replied. "And anger, when left alone, becomes something else." Rocca didn't move. Then Sicko landed on his shoulder and chirped once loudly right in his ear. Rocca turned to the man. "Can we stop him?" "No," the man said. "But you can." Rocca's breath caught. "He won't listen to me," he said. "He doesn't have to," the man replied. "But the others will. They already do." Rocca looked at the village again. He saw Dito searching through the crowd. He saw his classmates huddled together in fear. And for the first time he understood. He wasn't just the boy with the broken voice. He was the one who could lead them forward. And the next choice he made would change everything. The storm had calmed, but the village was far from safe. Children cried behind walls that no longer felt strong. Parents shouted not out of anger but fear. Rama, high on the back of the wild buffalo, roared louder than any thundercloud. The animal's hooves crushed anything in its path. Baskets, bamboo poles, the woven mats where farmers had laid their harvested rice just hours ago. No one could stop him. Not the men who once disciplined him. Not the teachers who once feared his rage. He had become a force too loud, too angry, too wild to contain. Rocca stood frozen on the ridge above, eyes fixed on the chaos below. His hands trembled. He didn't feel brave. He felt small. Just a boy with wet shoes and a bird on his shoulder. What could he possibly do against a beast that charged like thunder? Against a boy like Rama, whose voice had never been silenced, only sharpened by cruelty. "You can't fight him," the old man said behind him, his voice steady. "But you can face him." Rocca turned. "How?" "He'll hurt me." "Perhaps," the man said. "But some storms must be walked through, not around." Sicko flapped her wings and leapt into the air, circling once above his head before flying toward the village. And Rocca knew. He had to follow. He ran. Down the muddy slope, past the edge of the broken schoolyard. His feet slipping over stones and cracked roots. As he reached the footpath leading into the village, familiar faces turned to him. Dito rushed up, mud streaking his cheek. "Rocca! Don't go near him. He's out of control." Rocca didn't stop. "Where are the others?" "In the prayer hall," Dito said breathlessly. "The younger kids are hiding behind the stage. The roof's shaking." "Get them out of there," Rocca said, voice rising above the panic for the first time in his life. "Lead them to the rice shed. Back one. The door is strong." Dito blinked, then nodded. "Be careful." Rocca kept running. The buffalo had now turned toward the western end of the village, where the path narrowed and the fences rose higher. One wrong turn and the animal would crush straight through the nearest hut, Mr. Samarna's house, where his blind daughter had been lying sick for weeks. Rocca cut across the mud, faster now, his lungs burning. He reached the fence just as Rama pulled the beast to a halt. They locked eyes. Rama's face twisted with something close to delight. "Well, well," he shouted from the buffalo's back. "The quiet little hero." "Stop," Rocca called out. "You're going to hurt someone." Rama laughed. "They already hurt me. All of them. Every teacher, every parent, every fake friend. This village deserves to feel what I felt." The buffalo pawed the ground, snorting, furious. Then tell them, Raka shouted. Tell them what you felt. Don't destroy what they built. No one listens, Rama growled. I'm listening. Raka stepped forward. Right now. I'm listening. The buffalo lunged, but Rama pulled the rope, keeping it back. For a moment everything stopped. The wind, the shouting, the sky itself. Raka took one more step. His voice cracked. You're not the only one who's felt alone, Rama. I was invisible too. I used to wish someone would just see me, hear me. But hurting them won't fix that. It'll only make the silence louder. Rama's grip loosened. His face trembled. But the buffalo bucked suddenly, rearing back, its hooves crashing into the ground. Rama lost balance. The rope slipped. The animal turned, charging forward. Straight at Raka. He froze. Then a flash of feathers. Sicko dove from the sky, screaming her loudest cry, her wings flapping wildly in the buffalo's face. It reared again, startled, and veered to the side, missing Raka by inches. It crashed into the fence instead, splintering bamboo and coming to a stop, stunned. Rama fell. Hit the ground hard. He didn't move. Villagers rushed in, seizing the moment. A few brave men restrained the animal. Others ran to check on the children. Screams turned into gasps, and gasps into silence. Raka stood still, his whole body shaking. His breath came in shallow bursts. Then he felt it, soft, warm, weightless. Sicko landed on his shoulder again, nestling against his neck like she had never left. The villagers gathered. Some stared. Some whispered. Then someone spoke. Did he just stop the buffalo? He faced Rama. And saved the whole side of the village. Voices began to rise. Not in fear, but in recognition. Raka didn't want applause. He didn't need it. But this time when people looked at him they truly saw him. Not as the boy who never spoke. But as the boy who did when no one else dared. Later that night, the village gathered under the large tree near the well. Though the mango tree was gone, people needed a place to be together again. Lanterns were lit. Mats were rolled out. Warm food was shared. Rama sat to the side, head bowed, arms wrapped around his knees. He didn't look at anyone. No one looked at him either. Until Raka walked over and sat beside him. He said nothing. For a long time neither did Rama. Then in a voice so small it nearly vanished, Rama whispered, I don't know why I did it. I was just so angry. Raka nodded. I know. More silence. Then Rama asked, You really weren't scared? Raka thought for a moment. I was terrified. But you did it anyway. Raka nodded again. Rama didn't reply. But his breathing slowed. His shoulders loosened. And though he didn't say thank you, something in the way he sat beside Raka told him. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. As the night deepened, and the children began to fall asleep on their mother's laps, Raka lay on the mat with Sicko beside him. Above him, the stars blinked quietly, like eyes that had watched everything. He had faced the beast. He had stood in the path of fear. And still he was here. Still whole. Still heard. Still holding onto the tiny broken wing that had once saved him. But deep in his chest something new stirred. Not fear. Not sorrow. Question. Because Sicko hadn't just returned to protect him. She had returned to lead him. To something else. And whatever it was coming soon. The days after the storm passed slowly, like the village was trying to breathe again. The buffalo had been tied near the forest, away from people, its rage now replaced with heavy exhaustion. Rama no longer walked around with his chin high. He stayed close to home, barely speaking. Some children avoided him. Others stared too long. But Raka, he didn't. He understood now what silence really meant. That sometimes it wasn't caused by shyness or fear. Sometimes it was the only space where pain could survive. Since that night, Sicko stayed close to Raka. She no longer left his side for more than a few hours. She no longer disappeared into the woods. She perched on his shoulder, followed him to school, sometimes landing on the windowsill to watch him draw or write. Some children laughed and called her his shadow. The teachers allowed it. Even Miss Surti, who used to scold Raka for every little thing, had changed. One evening she brought him tea. Real tea. In her best glass. She didn't say anything. She didn't smile. But she placed it gently on the table, walked away. And Raka saw her shoulders fall in a way that looked tired. Maybe even sorry. That night, Raka sat under the stars again, with Sicko in his lap. He watched the sky, the same sky that had watched him since the day his world fell apart. He whispered, "I don't know what's next." Sicko didn't chirp. She simply looked up at him. Then the wind changed. A sudden gust swept through the yard. Not cold, not loud, but purposeful. It carried a sound. A song soft and slow. Not Sicko's voice. Not the voice of a bird. But something deeper. Familiar. Raka stood, eyes scanning the dark. Then he saw it. A paper, folded, floating on the wind, drifting through the air like a feather. It landed near his feet, untouched by the mud, as if waiting for him. He picked it up. It was old. Yellowed. Edges curled. But the writing on it was fresh. The stone remembers you. Come before the moon is full. There was no name. No sign of who had written it. But Raka knew. His chest tightened. The circle of stones. The pool of memory. The old man with eyes like trees. He looked at Sicko. She chirped once. Flew into the air. Then circled him twice before heading west. Toward the forest. Toward the stones. He didn't wait. He grabbed his jacket, slipped out of the house and ran. The moon was rising. Only half full but climbing fast. He reached the forest entrance, heart pounding. The air was thick with night sounds. Crickets, frogs, the whisper of leaves rubbing together. But the path ahead felt clear, like it was calling his name. He walked faster. Sicko stayed ahead, never flying too far. Guiding him the way she always had. Not with words but presence. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The wind softened. The air cooled. The earth seemed to remember his steps. Then he arrived. The circle of stones stood waiting, unchanged. The pool in the center shimmered softly under the moonlight. But this time he wasn't alone. The old man stood beside the pool, scarf wrapped tighter around his neck, hands folded behind his back. "You came," he said without turning. "You sent the note," Raka replied. The man nodded. Not many children return after their voice is found. Most forget. "I haven't," Raka said. "I can't." The man turned slowly. His face was the same. Kind. Worn. Touching. "I brought you here because there's one more truth you need to see," he said. Raka's throat tightened. "More." The man pointed to the pool. Raka stepped forward. He stared into the water. First nothing. Then it shifted. He saw a room, dimly lit, walls made of bamboo. A woman sat in the corner, weeping. He didn't know her. Then the scene shifted. A boy no older than 10, shouting at a tree while holding a small slingshot. His face burned with anger. His eyes were red. It was Rama. He looked younger, thinner, his shirt too small for his body. In the corner of the room behind him was a man, tall, loud, smashing a bowl to the floor. Then another scene. Rama, sitting in the schoolyard alone, scratching his name into the wood of the bench with a stone. A group of children walked past, laughing at him. One threw water at his back. Then it shifted again. Raka saw himself, watching from the distance, drawing in his notebook, never looking up. The water calmed. Raka turned to the old man. His voice cracked. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you have a choice," the man said. "You can be the one who was rescued, or the one who rescues others." Raka lowered his gaze. "I don't hate him," he whispered. "But I don't trust him." "You don't need to trust him," the man replied. "Only to understand him." Raka looked at the pool one more time. The images were gone now. But something in him had changed. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. But he knew he couldn't walk away. When he turned to speak again, the man was gone. The scarf lay folded on the stone. Sicko flew down and landed on it, chirping once. Then she looked at Raka and waited. He picked it up. It smelled of old leaves and river water. Time. He walked home in silence. At school the next day, the children were busy preparing for the next festival. This one was smaller, just for the school. But the theme was courage. Everyone was invited to share a short poem or a story. Many children were excited, others nervous. Rama sat at the edge of the yard watching. Raka saw him. And this time he didn't look away. He walked across the grass, stood in front of him and said, "There's a place I want to show you. A place with stones and a mirror made of water." Rama didn't answer. But he looked up. Raka didn't push. He just said, "When you're ready," and walked away. Later that afternoon, when the school bell rang, Raka stayed behind to finish his drawing. He didn't see Rama leave. He didn't know if the words had landed. But when he got home and opened his notebook to where he had drawn the circle of stones, there was a new line, scribbled in shaky handwriting beneath it. "Maybe I'll come. Not for you. For me." Raka smiled. Sicko chirped. And the wind whispered through the trees. The morning of the school's Courage Festival began with gray clouds and a slow, uncertain breeze. The bamboo flags tied to the schoolyard poles barely moved. The children gathered in their best clothes, some wearing clean shirts ironed just that morning, others dressed in faded uniforms that had seen many years of wear. Despite the weather, a small stage had been built from old planks and benches. It was nothing grand, just a wooden platform with colored paper strung above it, but to the children it felt like a palace. Raka sat on the edge of the platform, sketchbook in hand, waiting for the teachers to finish calling names. Around him, children rehearsed short lines under their breath. Some tapped their feet nervously. Others held poems scribbled on wrinkled notebook pages. Sicko perched calmly on a bamboo pole behind him. Her feathers slightly fluffed against the wind. She hadn't left his side all morning. "Raka!" Dito called, rushing over with a small paper flower crown in his hand. "Here. I made this for you." Raka blinked. "For me?" "Well, yeah," Dito said, a little shy. "You're the bravest one here." Raka hesitated, then slowly took it and placed it on his head. "Thanks. You going up today?" Dito asked. Raka nodded once. "You're gonna do great," Dito said, smiling wide before running off to rejoin the others. As the festival began, one by one, children climbed onto the stage and shared their pieces. Some recited stories about imaginary heroes with swords made of fire. Others told tales about their grandparents, or sang songs about dreams and flying fish. The audience, teachers, parents, and siblings, clapped gently after each performance, proud of each small voice that dared to speak. Then Rocca's name was called. He rose slowly, walking to the center of the stage with his sketchbook pressed tightly to his chest. His feet felt heavy. The sky darkened a little, like the clouds were folding into themselves. He stood before the crowd, his heart thumping in his ears. He opened the sketchbook. There was no script, no poem, just drawings. He lifted the page facing the audience. A sketch of a bird with a broken wing flying over a forest. "This is my voice," Rocca said softly. "I didn't use it for a long time. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid that if I spoke, no one would care." He flipped the page. A boy alone beneath a mango tree. This was me. Another page. The same boy. This time with a bird on his shoulder. A light breaking through the trees. This is the first time someone listened. He flipped again. A boy standing before a wild animal. A second boy. Angry, lost, riding it like a storm. This is the moment I stopped running. Then one last page. Two boys sitting on the edge of a pool. A circle of stones behind them. A reflection beneath them. Their faces side by side. This is the beginning of something I don't understand yet. But I want to. Silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Until the schoolyard filled with applause. Rocca stepped down. His legs shook, not from fear but from release. He walked to the edge of the crowd and sat beside Dito, who clapped the hardest. But just as the teachers were about to close the event, someone unexpected stood up from the back row. Duma. He wore his school shirt. The collar wrinkled. His shoes were muddy. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked slowly to the stage and stood there, hands clenched, eyes staring down. The crowd quieted. He didn't speak. For a long time he just stood there. Then he raised one hand, and in it was a stone. Smooth. Flat. "I found this," Rama said finally, "in a place someone showed me. A place with a mirror made of water." His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "I didn't come here to be forgiven. I came because I didn't know what else to do. I was angry. I still am. But that place, it showed me something I never saw before." He paused, took a breath. A boy who wasn't afraid to speak. And a bird who never gave up. The crowd listened, some in shock, others in silence. "I'm not brave," Rama said. "Not yet. But I want to try." He stepped down. And before he returned to the back, he looked at Rocca. Their eyes met. Not as enemies. Not even as friends. Just two boys. One who had lived in silence for too long. The other who had used his voice like a weapon. Both broken. Both trying to find something whole. The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. Teachers smiled with pride. Children whispered with curiosity. The air smelled like fried bananas and wet grass. But Rocca stayed quiet. That night, he returned to the stone circle. He brought no questions. Only the scarf of the old man, the sketchbook, and a small pouch of bird seeds. Sicko followed as always. When he reached the pool, the moon had just begun to rise. The water reflected his face, calm now, stronger. He placed the scarf on the stone, opened his sketchbook, tore out the last drawing. He folded it, then placed it gently on the surface of the pool. It didn't sink, floated. He whispered, "Thank you," then turned away. As he walked home, Sicko flew ahead of him. She no longer looked back. She didn't need to, because Rocca no longer followed from behind. He walked side by side with the voice he once lost. And this time, he was ready to use it for others. The season changed. The mango trees had begun to bloom again, their sweet scent drifting through the village paths. The sky stayed blue longer each day, and the river, once wild with rain, now moved softly, reflecting the sun like glass. The village had returned to its rhythm, slow, humble, full of small gestures and shared labor. But for Raka, something had shifted inside, something permanent. He no longer avoided the sound of voices. He no longer flinched at sudden questions or unexpected footsteps behind him. When someone called his name, he looked them in the eyes. When someone laughed near him, he smiled. And sometimes he even laughed too. The school now kept a section of its notice board for drawings, sketches made by students, each one signed at the corner. Raka's filled the board often, not with perfect images, but with memories turned into shapes. He drew Sicko, of course, but also Dito, Miss Surti drinking tea alone, Rama sitting beneath the school's banyan tree, and the circle of stones in the forest, with a pool that never showed the same reflection twice. Rama had changed too. Not completely. Not all at once, but enough. He helped clean the schoolyard. He no longer pushed the younger students aside. He sat beside Raka during lunch. Not to talk, just to sit. Sometimes that was enough. But one morning everything felt different. Raka woke to a strange stillness. Sicko wasn't at the windowsill. She wasn't perched on his lamp. The tiny feathers she always left behind were scattered. But she was gone. He searched the house, then the yard, then the school. Nothing. A soft worry began to rise in his chest. He tried not to panic. Birds wandered. Maybe she'd flown off to stretch her wings. Maybe she was just near the river, watching the fishermen haul in nets. But by evening she hadn't returned. The next day he went to the forest. He stood at the edge of the trees, where they always began their walks. He listened, waited. Still nothing. The sky turned pink and gray. He called softly, "Sicko." Only the wind answered. And then a memory of the old man's voice, clear as if he stood beside him now. "She came to guide you, not to stay forever." Raka turned toward the forest. He walked the path they had walked so many times. The birds above him chirped and rustled, but none flew low. None circled his shoulder. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. When he reached the stone circle, the air was warm. The pool glowed with a faint shimmer. On one of the stones lay a small object. He stepped closer. Feather. Not brown. Not gray. But white. He picked it up gently. Its texture was soft, but its core was strong. He looked into the pool. This time there was no image. Just water. Just the sky. And in that moment Raka understood. Sicko had not left because something was wrong. She had left because he no longer needed her to be beside him. He had become something else. Not a boy who followed. Not a child who hid. But someone who could carry his own silence, and choose when to break it. When he returned to the village, he tucked the feather into his sketchbook, pressed between two pages he had never shown anyone. One was the image of Sicko landing on his shoulder the first time. The other, the wild buffalo veering off its path. That week, a stranger came to the village. A woman, thin and sunburned, with eyes that darted too quickly, like she didn't trust the earth beneath her feet. She carried a bag full of books and asked to speak with the teachers. She had heard of a boy who stopped a beast with his voice. She didn't believe it, but she wanted to see. When the principal called Raka into the staff room, the woman asked him one question. "What made you speak?" Raka looked at her, then slowly answered, "Someone believed I had something worth saying." She blinked. That wasn't the answer she had expected. "And who was that?" she asked. He smiled gently. "A sparrow." She gave him a confused look. The principal laughed uncomfortably. But Rocka didn't explain further. Because he didn't need to. The next few days passed peacefully. Until one night, as Rocka sat beneath the banyan tree sketching the village in moonlight, a soft chirp broke the silence. He looked up. On the branch above him sat a sparrow. Not Sicko, but a new one. Smaller, younger, trembling with caution. Rocka slowly extended his finger. The bird hopped forward, then paused, then stepped onto his hand. He smiled. Not because the bird chose him, but because he had become someone who could be chosen. Behind him, the school bell rang once, though no one had touched it. The wind passed through the trees. The stars blinked like they always had. And in that moment, Rocka understood what the old man meant when he said, "Keeping your voice alive is harder than finding it." Because now it wasn't just his own voice he carried. It was the echo of every child who had been forgotten. It was the silence of every sparrow that had ever flown alone. And it was the story of a boy who found himself at the edge of the forest, guided by a bird, healed by a mirror of water, and made whole not by being heard, but by choosing to speak. Dear listeners, this story teaches us that the deepest wounds are often the ones we cannot see. A child like Rocka, who lost his parents and lived in silence, may carry an entire world of unspoken emotions. Yet within that silence, he discovered a new strength, through a small sparrow named Sicko. Sicko was more than just a bird. She became a symbol of hope, a symbol of trust, a reminder that even the smallest gesture of kindness can change the path of someone who feels invisible. We learn that healing doesn't always come from words. It can come from presence, from consistency, and from the courage to face the past. When Rocka finally found his voice and stood before others, it wasn't because he had no fear. It was because he chose not to be defeated by it. And when he reached out to Rama, the angry and misunderstood boy, we were reminded that understanding is often more powerful than judgment. This story shows us that true courage doesn't come from physical strength. It comes from a heart willing to face its wounds and choose not to respond with hatred. Rocka taught us that we are not defined by what we've lost, but by what we choose to do with what remains. Dear friends, this story is a complete work of fiction. All characters, events, and places were created to feel real, with the purpose of offering motivation, inspiration, and life lessons for anyone who has ever felt alone, broken, or in search of meaning in their silence. Thank you so much for listening until the end. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you care about, please leave a comment. Tell us where you're listening from, like and subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing stories that inspire and uplift. See you again in the next story. And may the journey of Rocka and Sicko stay close to your heart.